Human Gay Male is social events for gay men who reject gender identity ideology. We now have an ideology tacked onto us that is targeting kids for transition, parading kink to them at pride events, wanting to go in and read stories to them in fetish wear. People go to things like saunas or even club nights that are just for gay men. We should have the right to our own spaces as well. And a former flatmate, he has pulled a trans man in a gay bar and gone home with her. I think there's an element of having to rationalise it to himself. There's definitely a group that are women who fetishise gay men. There are a lot of gay men with HIV who don't want to go to a support group where there are women, and those spaces don't exist.
When it comes to gender critical, there's also different levels of approach in delivering the message.
Occasions where I've had pile on from our own side, having to go at another person who's on the same side. That's time you could have been questioning someone who's on the other side. I think there are some women who just hate men, in the same way there are some men who just hate women, and that's not a good thing.
James Roberts, hello, and welcome to my podcast. You are
Hello.
very welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much for reaching out. You are actually the second guest I've so far met in person. So even though it was ever so brief, we literally exchanged just a couple words, but hopefully it won't be long again, as we both live in London, the UK.
Yeah.
And you are the human gay male, right? Yeah. And my first question is, are you a cis gay male or a trans gay male? Because it's so hard to tell.
Well, my pronouns field on my LinkedIn profile says pronouns based on biology. So if anyone can't tell, that's what it is.
Are you able to put custom pronouns on LinkedIn? Yeah,
so they've had the field on there for I think 2 or 3 years, but you can then put custom ones as well. So a lot of people just obviously put in something. I think it's one of the things that kind of, if you want a full profile, you fill all the fields in. So I think a lot of people do it without really thinking why they're doing it. They're not particularly trying to make a statement, but that's part of So they just do it. So yeah, there's a few now I've seen other people put. You've got to be more careful on LinkedIn than Twitter. It's not a complete free speech space on LinkedIn, but there's that many more talking about reality on there now that they can't shut us all down. I've been suspended and had stuff restricted 2 or 3 times, and I've appealed on LinkedIn. I've appealed. I've had a post taken down 2 or 3 times, and I've appealed. And it's an automated appeal process, so you can't put any detail in. And they do that twice, and then you can raise a ticket through their system. And when I've done that, they then write back to me. The quickest one was the same day, but it's been a couple of days. They'll write back to me and be like, "Oh yeah, what you said was fine. We'll put it back." Like, well, then why have you taken it off in the first place? It's because you've got some progressive administration person who it's been reported, and then they take it down.
Yeah. That's such a big problem, right? Because we hear about in Waterstones and Foils, the youth hiding all the gender critical books, even though they're supposed to be on sale, or gluing the pages together. And can I ask you what it was you said? Can you remember?
So this month, the holy month of Pride, I'm essentially searching for anyone mentioning Marsha Trans Stonewall riot, and if they're perpetuating the myth, I'm sending them the link of the interview with Marsha/Malcolm, saying, "No, wasn't there till hours later. No, I know I'm a boy." Like, it's unbelievable how easily people just go along with that, and that's the name they mention. They don't mention any of the other kind of names that you would know, or any of the factual stuff. So,
well, Sylvia Rivera as well.
That's the other one, yeah. I put something on with that, and then it's been gender critically type stuff, or sex realism, however people want to describe it, stuff. And it's a lot, as I say, it's a lot stricter on LinkedIn, so you can't kind of just have a rant like you can on Twitter. You do need to be professional, because it is a professional platform. But what that has led to is more, a lot of people haven't engaged, but there have been more actual conversations and people, genuine question, here's the thing I disagree on with you, blah, blah. One guy, we met up for coffee to talk about it, like a 3-hour conversation with a gay guy who is very trans women. But then when we actually had a face-to-face conversation, he agrees with all the stuff about, we shouldn't be giving medication to kids, and kind of went all through the stuff. The final kind of sticking point for him, or the thing that made him really think, was when he was talking about like I said, if I said I was a woman now, could I go into the women's changing rooms? He's like, well, no, because you've not done anything to change. You haven't been living as a woman. Like,
Yeah.
What does living as a woman mean? And that was the kind of what stumped him. So again, people going along with it, but that wouldn't have happened from a conversation, I don't think, on Twitter. But LinkedIn is a different kind of conversation because it's real names and real photos. So it's kind of a bit more open in that way.
Are you still connected with colleagues from your past who would see that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So my background is kind of in kind of communications roles and then charity and membership. And now I'm a freelance consultant in those sorts of places.
Nice.
And even so, we were saying before we started about how I can't be fired. So it's quite nice. I feel like I can have a responsibility to speak up and say stuff because I can't get fired. But I have had, when I was freelancing for someone else, dealing with a lot of their commercial stuff, had two different large clients of theirs, tech clients of theirs, start a meeting or mention to me at something, had asked about things I've been mentioning on LinkedIn. I kind of wanted to know a bit more. And it didn't put them off and didn't cause a problem. I've had other kind of large organizations that have been clients that I know through contacts there, the conversations come up about, the stuff I've talked about on LinkedIn, but they've still employed me to do the work because either enough senior staff do go along with reality and are scared of the junior staff. There's an organization I'm going to be doing a piece of work with later next month, where their whole senior team, they're a global organization and they're very small, but their whole senior team believes in reality when it comes to the binary nature of sex.
Shocker.
Because they operate in an LGBTQ sector, all their junior staff are completely captured. So I'm talking with them about how can you start to do stuff without causing a mutiny. So I think, it's a weird thing with the place of work. But former clients, and where I was at work and people I've worked with, I think there are some who I speak to less or speak to me less. And I know it's because they're going along with stuff. And there's others who I've spoken to, they're like, I completely agree with whatever you're saying.
I would love to hear about, obviously you run Human Gay Male. And I suppose starting before that, I'd love to know your journey in what led you to having some of the ideas you have, some of the activism you've been doing. And then you can sort of lead straight into what Human Gay Male does, what you've done, what's coming up.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as I say, my background has been largely in the charity sector in various forms. And part of that has been in the kind of LGBTQ or LGBT as it was then. And actually it was LGB and T. So I used to be the chair of trustees for the LGBT Consortium, which is like the membership body for LGBT charities in the UK. This is more than a decade ago.
Right.
And at that time, we were using LGB ampersand T, and the Government Equalities Office was doing that as well, recognising it's two distinct communities, although there's an umbrella to that. And that, since I've left that's gone by the wayside. So I've done stuff with those sorts of charities. I've been a project manager for a Pride Festival. I've volunteered at Stonewall. I've done all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
I also used to run The List, which was a gay professionals networking events in London, and gay speed dating called 28 Gays Later, which is like a classier version on gay speed dating. So that's kind of, I've done various gay things, so to speak, in the past. And I've kind of worked with various different people. So that's kind of a background. I haven't really been involved in that sector or those sorts of things for about a decade. So I am the tail end of Gen X, best generation. So I'm going to be like 45 this year. I've grown up. I didn't come out until very late, but nobody was surprised. I didn't technically come out to family until I was in my late 20s. And the response was, we've known, it's never been a problem. Like, why didn't you say something sooner? Very supportive.
Would you say there was any main driving force that prevented you from coming out, or was it more of a wider societal, like, difficult to accept?
No, not so much. It was more, specifically, so although I'm an atheist now, I was kind of raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I was quite involved with stuff. And
me too. I was raised Catholic.
So my mum's from like a big Catholic Irish family. So I don't actually, the people I still, not that I really talk to anyone from that world anymore, but like one of my closest friends is, I joke about how we've known each other since we were straight. That's how long I've known him. and we met in like a Catholic youth conference type thing decades ago. So that was kind of probably part of why I didn't come out, I think, within a family setting until I went to university slightly later and kind of came out then. So yeah, I think there is a thing about, I don't know so much if it's the same for lesbians, but for gay men, a sense of everything happens a bit later sometimes, and you feel like you're going through what would have been your teenage years in your 20s, and if you're coming out later, it can be like that as well. So there's an amount of that to it. So, but yeah, I kind of not really faced any. I've been very lucky, I think, in some respects, and not really faced any major things. I've had. I worked for an American organization, and I was let go, and there was some question around, was that an element of part of that decision and things like that. So it's been potentially there, but I guess I've not let it be a problem. So I've been quite lucky, I suppose, compared to some people who haven't got.
Funny what we have in common, because I grew up in Ireland, raised Catholic, although not strictly from a family perspective. So it was quite easy for me to kind of, siphon my way out of that. But I do, and I would actually agree as well with my experience being largely good, but obviously it's difficult just in itself growing up with the gender dichotomy, and sometimes being the only one, right, the only gay in the village. So that can be a difficult experience regardless of how much acceptance you have. But something I hear a lot now, that's sort of a conservative talking point, I guess, if you want to call it that, and a lot from the States, is people say, no one cares anymore. Like, everyone accepts you. You're just people who like being with someone of the same sex. We don't need to celebrate you all the time. I think they're oversimplifying it. I'd love to know your opinion on that, because while I think in the West we have wider acceptance and marriage and everything, there's obviously still going to be individual families, individual cultures and religions where it's still an incredibly difficult experience for an individual. And I think perhaps they're missing that point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference whether you're talking about the West or the rest of the world. I think definitely UK, Europe, and definitely North America. I think the Republicans in the US, it's mainstream. And I don't know whether that's an actual acceptance or a realization of these are people who are going to spend money and have a family and whatever else, and same with anyone else. So I think there's a culture and society shift of acceptance and a political realization shift. So I think it's become mainstream. And I think that's part of why we see people kind of going down well, actually, I'm queer and I'm trying to be something different, because if you're just this white gay man, then you're just mainstream. Oh,
for sure. Hands up here is one of those. All right. Well, thanks so much for that background. So let's pivot back to, I guess you were talking about your past jobs and then.
Yeah. So I've been kind of out of the LGBT sector, charities, volunteering, that kind of stuff for a while. And then kind of about 4 or 5 years ago, started to see stuff around, what are these things called TERFs, and seeing those sorts of things going on. And then I've talked to other people before about this. I had Helen Pluckrose's video, the postmodernism lecture, kept coming up as one of my recommended videos on YouTube, and I didn't watch it for ages, and then eventually did. And then that kind of led me to trigonometry, and then I found Posey Parker, and then I found LGB Alliance, and so kind of absorbed all of that. I think
it sounds like a very common, probably rabbit hole.
Yeah. I think, and this is why it's really difficult to talk to people who haven't seen what's going on yet, is because there's so much. It's kind of where to start. You have to kind of plow through various different bits, and the conversation's moved on so much even in the last 6 months, but definitely the last couple of years.
For sure.
So I think when I was chair of trustees at the LGBT consortium, it was never something I said or really probably articulated properly to myself, but there was that why is the T with the LGB? They are very different, and it didn't sit easily as to why that was merged. I wasn't thinking of it as forced teaming in the kind of way I would describe it now, because I don't think it was the same kind of problem as it was as it is now then. But yeah, I think having had that background and seen those different kind of groups and communities previously, and then seeing all the stuff around the TERFs and the various kind of bits I've seen, that was kind of, I say, I've been tweeting as human gay male for about 4 years, and that was a kind of an adaptation of the adult human female definition. I'd left social media other than LinkedIn a while ago, so I kind of created the account specifically to follow this issue, which is really weird because I would get people kind of saying, "This is all you tweet about? Is this your whole life?" I'm like, "No, I just use this account for this thing. I have a life outside of social media."
Yeah. Twitter is sort of, it can become a space for activism in that sense.
Yeah.
And while you were at that consortium, what was the climate like and the conversation like? Was it politically charged at all, or?
Not really, because it was. So I was chair. It would have been around 2010 to 2012 sort of time, and it really was, as I say, working with Government Equalities Office, working with trying to bring the sector together more. Is quite disparate. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but if you exclude kind of HIV charities and put them in the health category, the rest of the LGBT charity sector in the UK, if you kind of look at it by finances, there's Stonewall, then there's like a couple of others, and then there's everything else. Like, it's a very small, spread out kind of charity sector, other than a few big names. So then the conversation really was restructuring as a membership organisation, best support for those organisations, and really bringing them together. Some of that was looking at where there were too many of the same thing being repeated and how to look at not necessarily mergers but more corporations. There wasn't really a kind of a political outward lobbying front alongside what we were doing, though. Obviously Stonewall was in the run up to Ruth Hunt. Like Ruth wasn't, Ben was still chief exec when I was involved, so it wasn't the direction we were expecting Stonewall to go after Ben left. It wasn't Ruth that I and a few other was expecting to become chief exec. So Ruth Hunt becoming chief exec was a surprise to some people. And then the direction she took stuff was not just a surprise, but actually a reversal of what she assured people as well. So
can you explain for the listeners, I guess, with Ben and Ruth, kind of what their ideologies were? What was the difference there?
So, let's say, when I volunteered in a small way as a volunteer, but they're obviously part of the consortium as well. So it wasn't even a conversation that I was aware of at that time. This is how recent this has kind of shifted. And even when they did add the T, they still weren't properly resourced to support or informed enough to support a very distinct group. They've now pivoted to be primarily looking at trans stuff. Obviously, the Ruth Hunt era is the adding the T and then the going down the gender ideology path. And
is Ruth trans?
No. Right. Ruth Hunt's just a lesbian who is now in the House of Lords. I think there's something around Jesus came to her on the dance floor in a disco somewhere, and she's an odd character in many ways. I don't know her that well. It wasn't the area of the organisation I volunteered with or worked with, so I don't really know her that well.
You could probably put her in the same group as that one who runs Mermaids.
Yeah, very similar.
Very disturbing. Okay, cool. So can you tell me a bit about, so when you were watching all these podcasts, interviews, learning about it, and that then led to you creating this account, what was that journey like psychologically for you in terms of realizing a lot of things that perhaps you hadn't considered yet?
So there wasn't any... So in a similar way to describing myself as an atheist, having been brought up Catholic, I can I can have the theological conversations and explain stuff, and the Bible as a literary text and all that kind of stuff. I didn't believe it even when I was doing stuff. It was a social community thing. So it's very similar, I think, with this. I've been involved in LGBT as a sector, but I've never thought that trans women are literally women, because the trans women I've known, like the one who I worked with on the Pride Festival, he was still intact. His kids still called him dad. Like, there was no delusion that people were not the sex they actually were. It was just about how they present to the world.
And he was realistic about that too.
Yeah. I probably more trying to stop myself now, but I had still referred to him as she and by the name he goes by. And in the same way that there are drag queens I will refer to as she, because I'm talking about the character. Out of drag, I know them as who they are on the bar staff or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was no kind of sudden moment of, oh my God, I've been wrong about all this. I didn't realize. It's kind of more, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but that makes sense. That's logical. I've had that kind of question in the back of my mind, and it's good to kind of find both the academic understanding of postmodernism element to it,
so
and
interesting,
the kind of where campaigning is starting to come. And the main shocking thing was how long lesbians had already been talking about this. And it's like, how have I not? Like, I've not really been involved in that sector for a while, but how have I not heard this? Mm-hmm. Given how long lesbians and women in general have been sounding the alarms on this.
So, something that's funny about it is people seem to view, well, some people say trans women are women, right? So they're actually looking at them as women. I think no one really deep down believes that. People kind of view them as this other category. There's a reason why people listen to trans women more than women and lesbians, and I do think that it boils down to the fact they're male.
I think there's an element of that to it. I think the other big part of it, in terms of why people listen to trans women, is because it's virtue signaling. I think people don't really understand the issue. I think there's a big, particularly in kind of political side of it, or with politicians, they've been sold this as it's gay rights 2.0, and they've made a mistake with gay rights, Section 28 and everything that's had happened in the past, and they don't want to repeat that. So I think and because most people's earlier understanding of trans women was the transsexuals and who were the really effeminate gay men who coped by living as if they were women. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, I think people haven't looked into it as much because it's kind of an area they're not particularly interested in, but they want to be seen to be doing the right thing. And so they see it as like an extension to gay rights. They don't want to get that wrong. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many confounding factors, and it's sort of a perfect recipe that's kind of everything's happened at once, right? And similar to yourself, I also, when I kind of started hearing everything, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can't really argue that. Any rational person would. However, when it comes to learning about the autogynephilia, my head was just like, so that's something when I'm trying to educate people on the topic, is trying to tease that out and help them understand, because I think when people realize that's a thing, they're very like, oh, okay, I need to take a step back. You're active on Twitter as the Human Gay Male. What happens next?
So found the LGB Alliance. I kind of did some work with them. I was on the management team for a little while. They were applying to be members of the LGBT consortium and had been refused. So I wrote kind of on their behalf to the chief executive, who is the person I recruited into that role and line managed when he was first in that role a decade ago, to kind of say, Paul, why aren't you letting this organization that's going to become a charity be a member? And obviously got the standard reply back from them. I also, through a connection with a former workplace, was connected to a doctor who wasn't part of the cast review but had been quoted in the publicity launching the cast review, and I'd emailed her to say about kind of, putting her in touch and finding out what was going on. And then it turned out she wasn't part of the cast review but did put me in touch with Hillary Cast, so I was able to kind of find out how people could kind of engage with the cast review. So I've done some stuff with that and kind of got involved with the LGB Alliance, as I worked with them on the management team for a year, kind of bringing some kind of charity background and general events, kind of organising stuff and the stuff I've done with other things to kind of help with them. And then I've also kind of been going to various Let Women Speak events and those sorts of things. So kind of just seeing what was kind of out there. I think in the last year, or during last year, I was kind of thinking what is actually useful for me to do. I'm self-employed, so I can speak up, and that's kind of part of why I've been speaking up. But what is it I can do that's actually useful? without recreating what other people are doing and what skills I bring and the sector I can kind of look at. And I think because women make up half the population, there are a lot more women involved in this than gay men. Gay men are a very small proportion of the population, but also gay men, it's really easy for gay men to not pay attention to what's going on, or to be part of circles or workplaces or volunteer organisations or whatever that are captured and are therefore going along with the trans women, what the ideology says, lines. So I wanted to do something that was, how do we reach more gay men? Because they are affected, not in the same way that women are. Obviously, it's much more specific and a physical threat and those sorts of things in terms of how the ideology affects women. But it does also affect gay men as a population, as part of the population of same-sex attracted people. So alongside supporting lesbians, but also the future generation of gay men who are the little boys now, who that could have been me if I was that age now, and the kind of the impact that it has on particularly younger gay men who are feeling, I think it's a mental health issue they're going to face in terms of what does it say when they're convincing themselves that they should be attracted to this woman who's calling herself a gay man because we're supposed to accept that this is a gay man.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do something that was specifically around targeting gay men, to engage them in the conversation and the debate, but also to connect to those of us who are already in the debate, because there wasn't really anything that was bringing gay men together. So decided to I've done eventsy stuff. All people say to me, events is kind of hard. It's like once you've got a venue and a date, it all falls into place. But that's because it's been what I've done for work and other things. So decided that's what I'd do. So yeah.
So is that the main sort of activity you guys do? Is it meetups and events?
Yeah. So we launched in January with the first event. So essentially, in a nutshell, Human Gay Male is social events for gay men who reject gender identity ideology. At the moment, so we've done a monthly event in London. Last month, we did the first one in Scotland. We were in Edinburgh. We're going to be in Scotland again in Glasgow in July. We've got about just under 400 people on the mailing list so far, or already, I should say. About 20% of those or fewer are outside the UK. Half of those who are in the UK are in London. So it's easier to kind of do stuff in London, but there are people in clusters elsewhere. So we're going to do a Manchester one, a Birmingham one, and an Exeter one in August and September. And then I kind of got a tour of North America. I'm over there anyway for a couple of things, and I've added some other bits on. So I'm going to be doing New York, San Francisco, Dallas, Washington, DC, and Toronto in Canada. So those may be a lot smaller events just in terms of how we can reach people. But it's more about doing them and having that start.
Sounds like an amazing trip, though. You're going to so many.
Yeah, I've got like 3 weeks, 5 cities in 3 weeks, as well as other things either side of that I'm doing. So again, I've kind of got the flexibility with my being in charge of my own work schedule that I can do that. So, and a lot of air miles I've been able to use to book flights without spending a lot of money. Nice. So, but yeah, it's been, I think so the idea is that it's providing a space for gay men to be able to speak freely about these sorts of issues or about kind of any other issues, but there's a lot of conversation about this, as well as a way to try and reach more gay men who haven't seen what's going on or maybe have questions and want to be able to ask those or talk about those. So it's very much just a social event at the moment, although it kind of feels like a therapy session with some people who've not, particularly if they're living a bit further out from London, they've come in and not been able to talk to anyone about this yet, and they've gone down the rabbit hole on YouTube and those sorts of things as well, but haven't been able to talk to anyone because everyone at their local gay bar or their circle of friends, at least publicly, is going along with it all. So it's providing a space for those sorts of guys to be able to talk about it. Longer term, I'm not going to be able to do stuff everywhere, and it shouldn't be about where I can get to. So we've got. I've done the first Scotland one. I'm going to be in Glasgow, but after that, the guys in Scotland can kind of pick a venue and kind of run those events. Tell me what they want to send out. I'll send it out through the mailing list. So I'll kind of be in the background, running it as almost a brand, if you like, and doing the emailing out. But like little chapters or groups can be wherever there are enough guys that want to put the events on. and develop those into other sorts of events as well. If they want to have kind of support groups for issues, or, you know, a hiking group or a karaoke night or other things as well, it can kind of be whatever people want it to become. So really, it's just kind of getting going to begin with. Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely be coming to one. You can hold me to that.
Yeah.
I plan on checking it out soon. But yeah, you should be really proud of yourself for starting something like that. Was any part of this experience daunting?
Not too much. I think that the daunting bit is are people going to turn up? So I knew there was an interest to do something. I've said several times about, to begin with, I'd have been happy if there were 6 of us around a table in a pub corner. It would have been something. And we had 40 people at the launch. So I was really, obviously, very happy with that. We've had about 25 each time for the London ones.
Yeah.
The June one is coming up on the 29th of June, the Saturday. It's the same day as Pride in London, so we're kind of billing that as an alternative to Pride in London. So if you're kind of fed up with Pride generally, if you're fed up of the indoctrination and the acronym Rainbow Mafia of Pride, if this is an alternative.
Is that the evening?
So no, it's from 2:00 in the afternoon. So we've got space booked out upstairs, a venue, well away from Trafalgar Square and everything that'll be going on with official Pride. We've got Gareth Roberts, who's the author of Gay Shame, and a couple of other people to speak. So it's still just informal drinks, but with a chance for some people to get up and to say something.
Yeah.
Wow. The daunting thing is, are people going to turn up, and just getting venues that will work for the event? So we've got a space that's semi-private enough that, because people don't know each other in advance for the most part, they're coming along to something. So it's got to be somewhere people can find us in the venue and know they're in the right place, but not somewhere that I've got to pay a higher fee for because there's no budget. This is like, I'm paying for the website, and I've paid for some t-shirts, and I've paid for some little flyers, but yeah, there's not. These are free events. I'm not doing this as a money spinner.
Yeah.
Like I've told the venues that it's a gay men's support group, but I haven't gone into massive detail about what it is, having seen what's happened when other events have had the venues targeted. Sure. So we've not had any problems with stuff from venues or people protesting or any of those sorts of things, which was it wasn't really daunting, but I suppose that was anywhere near. But also, having seen the pattern of the kind of trans rights activists who do protest stuff, they protest stuff that women are at.
They go for the women. I was going to say
and
that.
Not to turn up where there's a couple of dozen guys.
100%.
So
100%. When you're having these events and people are opening up, talking about their frustrations, how they feel, what are some of the common themes you hear about how this is impacting gay men?
So it ranges. I think there's a lot of, one of the main kind of reactions is a disbelief at how we've got here. I think there's also there's a big element of the damage it's doing to the reputation of gay people. So in that context, we're talking about gay men, but affecting lesbians as well. But particularly gay men. We spent a long time. I say we. I'm kind of the tail end of a generation that really faced it. But we've spent a long time as gay men, particularly dispelling the association with paedophilia and the kind of slurs that came with that. And we now have an ideology tacked onto us that is targeting kids for transition, is parading kink to them at Pride events, is wanting to go in and read stories to them in fetish wear in schools and all that kind of stuff. So there's the damage to the reputation of the gay, particularly gay male community, is a theme that people are kind of frustrated by, should we say.
Yes.
I think there's also again, it's not the same physical risk as it is for women, where a man calling himself a woman goes into female-only spaces, but the loss of gay male-only spaces because they are now open to women. So if people go to things like saunas or even club nights that are just for gay men, and there's a woman who identifies as a gay man, that's kind of, we should have the right to our own spaces as well.
This is something I'm interested in, because I do hear a lot of scream and shout about that on Twitter, and I'm totally with you. I think it's very inappropriate, and I think if any female who's taking testosterone and wants to kind of appear male goes to a sex party or a bath, I really think that she's got another thing coming. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're, yeah, I mean, any guy who goes for that, I think it's, you do you, but I don't think you can necessarily be a full homosexual, right?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think I have varying thoughts at different times about to what degree, not that bisexuality exists, but to what degree bisexuality exists on the spectrum of bisexuality and the difference between men and women. And there's stuff I've kind of heard presentations on years ago from kind of within working in the university sector from kind of sexuality and sex researchers. They've probably got a proper title that I've completely forgotten, but there was research that was done around for men, it's much more you are either gay or you're straight or you're much closer to one end or the other, whereas women not tend to be, but where they are, there's much more a range in that kind of middle ground of bisexuality for women, particularly changing over a lifetime. So I think if you are a man who is a gay man, but you are also open, if you're technically bisexual because you are attracted to some women, that's fine. Be bisexual who are bisexually is predominantly into men. That's absolutely fine. But don't claim to be a gay man and don't berate gay men who are not interested in having sex with women or having women LARPing as gay men in gay male spaces.
And on that, I think there's probably gay men who've kind of ended up doing it as well because they felt, oh, well, this is right. Or, a lot of these females can be quite passable, right, in certain circumstances. So I guess it must have happened. Perhaps you meet someone and then you realize, and then the guy feels, oh, well, this is supposed to be how it is. So that's just me speculating, I suppose.
No, I think it definitely happens. Yeah, it definitely happens. So there's one of my closest friends and a former flatmate who've spoken about before, doesn't speak to me anymore. Stopped talking to me when they realized I did an LGB Alliance webinar. And once he'd seen that I'd done that and just stopped talking to me, we did meet up and talk once and kind of had a very circular conversation. But he's about 10 years younger than me. He's very kind of political activist type. But he has pulled a trans man in a gay bar and gone home with her. And I think there's an element of having to rationalize it to himself that must have been a gay man because I'm a gay man. And he's not a kind of could be a bisexual man. He's definitely a gay man. And he's having to justify to himself that that's what he's done. And there's nothing wrong in what he's done, but what is wrong is an ideology that's telling him he should be okay with that and accept that. It's kind of that you've just not met the right girl yet kind of feeling to it a bit. So yeah, it definitely happens. And I think that has a detrimental effect on the gay men that happens to.
And it's very peculiar for me to try and wrap my head around. It makes a lot more sense with the males identifying as lesbians and, you can kind of see where that's coming from.
Yeah.
But for the straight females identifying as gay males, it's a very odd thing to imagine, and I do think that sort of inverted sexuality exists in females too.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's what's going on in every case.
My take on it is I think there's a large proportion of particularly younger women who are looking to escape being a woman because of the way the world is and those sorts of things, being awkward with their body as a teenager, all of that. I think there's definitely a group, and I don't know how big a proportion of the group it is, that are women who fetishize gay men. I think there's always been women who fetishize gay men. There are women who will watch gay porn rather than straight porn, and those sort of things. So I think there's definitely a group that are that, and I think that is a part of it. I think where it becomes more of an issue, so I think there's one angle that's what happens in a sauna or a sex club or that kind of thing, and you could refuse that if you're in that sort of space. You could, if a woman comes over to you, whatever. But
and have you? I meant to ask you. Have you heard of saunas? Have you heard of this happening quite a lot?
Not a vast amount. I've heard it be talked about. There's a couple of guys who I know not based in London, who've talked to me about it in other parts of the UK they're in. There was one of the saunas in London. There was stuff on Twitter about I don't know if it was an advert they had or their kind of signage outside that had a photograph, and one of the people had like the towel up around them because it's a woman, and you kind of at a glance, it's a woman with a man's haircut. But actually, if you look, it's a woman, but that's in their advertising as a gay sauna. So it's definitely a thing that's out there. The element that it becomes or should become more of a concern for more gay men is where it's not in a sex-related space. So there are two guys in the last year or during last year that talked to me that said they couldn't find a support group in London for gay men with HIV that was specifically for gay men anymore. They all even the ones that say they're for gay men are open to trans men. And there are a lot of gay men with HIV who don't want to go to a support group where there are women. There's probably other health issues that are male health issues, or even a health issue that some men are not, men don't talk to each other as much as women do. Gay men probably do talk more than straight men to each other. But there's still a sense of there are certain things that you would want to go to a support group with people who are as like you as possible, because it's a really personal thing that you're talking about. And those spaces don't exist or are diminishing. So one of the things I want to be able to do or plan to do as part of the Human Gay Male initiative is to do that research on what groups are out there, from health support stuff to sports teams to whatever else it might be, that purport to be for gay men. How many of them actually are actually for gay men? And how many of them would accept a woman who calls herself a gay man? And if they do, why is that?
I mean, I would struggle to imagine there are any who wouldn't, even if they kind of innately wanted to, but with the pushback.
So a conversation I've had on LinkedIn with people about language and language changing. I used to do it on Twitter a couple of years ago, and then stopped because it's shouting into the void and doesn't really do anything. But actually, LinkedIn's a different space. So this holy month of Pride, I am any post I find that is perpetuating the myth that trans women started the Stonewall riot, or that Marsha and Sylvia were trans women, or that we owe our rights to them, and all that kind of stuff, I will post a correction and post a link to the videos either of the historians talking about what actually happened, or the clips of Marsha where he is saying, I wasn't there until hours after it started. And there's another clip where he very clearly understands that he's a man and that he was a prostitute, and there's guys that he would take up to the hotel room, and then they'd realize he wasn't actually a girl. So but I've had people tell me, oh, well, I'm calling them trans because if they were here now, that's a label they would use. Labels change and words change, and that word didn't exist, but they existed. It's like, no, that's just absolute rubbish.
It's all hypocrisy, right? Because they say you have to respect everyone's identity. And I made a video recently about Pop and Ollie. You've probably heard of them. And they have a full TikTok talking about how you can make history more inclusive for your classroom, and then they give instructions on basically how to extrapolate a person from the past and then apply gay or trans to them. And just like that's totally fine. They also spew the Marsha Sylvia Rivera narrative, and that one's just interesting because it's so easy to refute. And I'm thinking, how has it not died
because
yet?
It's virtue signaling. There are people who haven't I've had one person from some organization respond to my comment to say, oh, we didn't realize that, and I'll edit the post. A few people saying, well, that's interesting, and everyone can take their own views, and then some just doubling down on it. But I think it's so often repeated, and most of the people, at least on LinkedIn, there's a lot of virtue signaling, lots of organizations and individuals, even people who consider themselves part of the LGBTQIA plus community, are repeating things to look good or to look righteous, and not actually looking into the detail. It's a really easy, I'd say it's a relatively easy thing to go and look up and find out what truth. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there as well. There's very little, in the posts I've found that responded to on this, there's very little talk of gay men and lesbians in posts about Pride and where Pride came from. Even people talking about the first Pride was a riot. It's like, no, it wasn't. Or, we owe our rights to the trans women of color who fought back. I'm like, no, because homosexuality was decriminalized 2 years earlier in England. So how do we owe them that right when it was 2 years earlier? And things like that. Like, people just don't understand and don't bother to learn history. And that's really sad for particularly younger gay men and lesbians who are in captured organizations or social circles who have no idea about our own history.
Totally the same. I mean, what they're being taught in schools is crazy. Interested to hear your thoughts on this, because while I would consider myself sex realist, gender critical, we would agree on probably 95% of things in terms of don't sterilize children and,
the obvious stuff.
Protect same-sex spaces. There's sort of obviously, just like the LGBT community, which is not really a community, but there are different pockets of that. There are different philosophies. When it comes to gender critical, there's also different levels of strength of beliefs, I guess, or approach in delivering the message. And there is this kind of portion of it that sometimes I feel quite lonely, right? Because I get stick from that side too for some of the content I make. And I guess Twitter can be such a vicious place, but there's definitely a branch of that comes across as extremely hateful to me. Like some people who kind of seem to have all the time in the world to just take photos of trans women from Reddit and then just ridicule them. And now for the trans women behaving badly and doing, kicking girls' asses in sports or abusing women verbally or physically, I have no problem with people saying whatever they want. I have no problem with anyone approaching this debate the way they want to, because I just think we should all be allowed to speak freely. When it comes to kind of the Kelly J. Keane sphere, it's really not something for me, because I guess I see a lot of lives with her, and not just singling her out, but I guess I feel like some of the ethos comes from that pocket because she's such an influential figure. It makes me a bit apprehensive to, now I'm definitely going to come to one of your events. But sometimes people reach out to me on Twitter and it's kind of another faceless profile. It says LGB and then a scissors emoji, TQ. And I'm kind of a bit like, I already know, like I've kind of stopped following those accounts because I'm like, I feel like they're just the same, And I do understand why some people might want to protect their identity, but I worry that we're going to end up making some of the same mistakes that the gender movement had, because when philosophy and an ideology or a belief system is so strong, you start missing bad behavior and you start blurring the lines in what's okay and what's not, I guess. For people that are that far into the spectrum, I really don't believe they're very likely to win people over who are on the fence. Whereas I sort of feel like people like myself that do sit a bit more in the middle, do have empathy for trans people, even the autogynephilic type, because of everything I've learned about it and the kind of emotional turmoil that can cause. But it's very hard for me to say that to gender critical feminists because they think that means I feel sorry for the ones doing terrible things. I'm like, no, don't feel sorry for them. I've been so harmed by tribalism when it comes to queer. I'm kind of worried about, because right now I'm still very much independent in the kind of stuff I do, but it's what will the other side be,
There's a lot there. And I have thoughts on all of it. So there's stuff I agree with Kelly J on, and there's stuff I wouldn't agree with her on, but not the point of what she's saying, but maybe how she's going. And like even she said recently, she'll say stuff as she thinks it, and then maybe think later that she could have said it in a more eloquent way, but she's not going to like edit herself, and that's fine. That there's a strength in doing that. There can be a downside to that, but it's not the end of the world. The main thing for me is the thing that you said about different approaches. The thing that frustrates me, so I don't agree with some things people say or the way they go about stuff. But people can do this, do this however they want to do it and the approach they want to take. What pisses me off is when people expect everyone else to take their approach.
Yes. You
can criticize or disagree with people's approaches, and you can discuss that and why you think it's better to do it one way or the other. And I think, the more we can understand where we disagree with anyone, it's kind of while getting into a conversation on LinkedIn with someone who thinks trans women are women, it's because at the very least, I don't expect to change their mind, I want them to understand what I think and me to understand what they think. So we at least understand why we disagree and what it is we disagree about, because actually it's often not very much, if at all. So I think within the gender critical non-movement, we should be able to debate and discuss those things. I think it's when people are either tone policing, and that's from either end of the how hardline or not people might be. I think criticize and question and debate it, but don't expect everyone to do it the way you would do it. And the context of that is, as I say, it's a non-movement. We're not a single movement. There are various aspects to the groups that are impacted by gender identity ideology. Women are obviously the largest of those groups by number, and most of the physical impact risk stuff obviously impacts women. But even within that, there are different groups of people in this for different reasons and with different priorities. So, and that's before you get to the same-sex sexual orientation group, and within that, what lesbians and gay men are facing is very different. And then you've got how children are impacted, and then you've got free speech, and then you've got the implications in the workplace. There's lots of different reasons people might be in this, or talking about this, or fighting back against it. Like every time that someone isn't just questioning, but is critical, or like having a go at another person who's on the same side, that's time you could have been questioning someone who's on the other side or pointing something out. Like, just don't waste your time and energy on it. There's one common enemy, and there is one thing we all agree on in terms of sex is innate and binary. Beyond that, there's a whole load of stuff we don't agree on. There will be left-wing people and right-wing people. There'll be leave and remain. There will be, all kinds of different axes, different subjects and issues that we will all have different views on. And we should be able to say we can work with people on this issue and disagree on other things, and that's absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Yeah, you said it very beautifully.
I've experienced on Twitter, and actually a year and a half ago, I deleted all my previous tweets from the 2 years prior, apart from a couple of threads and a couple of key things that I kind of left on. Just to kind of have a clean slate and try not to kind of get into pointless arguments and with our own side and those sorts of things. But I've had 2, maybe 3 occasions where I've had pile on from our own side, because Twitter is not great at nuance always, or long form conversation. And there is stuff that's taken out of context, and then it's, a man saying it. It feels like a man saying it, so we're going to disagree. And what's really frustrating is I've said something where I've agreed with one set of women, and another set of women have said, you're not listening to women because you're not listening to us. Like, but I'm repeating what this other group, like, which group of women am I supposed to agree with? And you can't do right for doing wrong. And I've written about it in the piece they did on Graham Linnen's Substack about the human gay male stuff, and where are all the gay men, and why I think some gay men will be reluctant to speak up and do stuff, because sometimes it's a minefield, and you can very easily say the wrong thing that's kind of taken out of context or misrepresented. And I think there are people who deliberately do that, and it's really hard to tell who are genuine and who are not on Twitter. But within that, or surrounding that context, I'm also very aware, having spoken to women who have been in that situation, or know women in a situation, who are people like trans widows or women who've been in abusive relationships. And it's not hard to understand why there are a group of women who just don't trust men.
I get it.
It makes complete sense. And I'm not going to say, well, you should just trust me because you don't know if I'm a risk or not. Given the background and experiences women who've gone through with men who have not been anywhere near the best of men, it's really understandable why they feel that as their first starting point towards men, and until they get to know them, or whatever it might be. I think it's really sad that the men this is a very specific example, but the men in those women's lives have taken that away from them in their future. There's a whole friendship they could have, or community they could have, or cooperation they could have, that has been taken away from them because of the experience they've had with some men, and not what that means, the starting point they have with other men. I think it probably happens for men who've been in abusive relationships with other men, or with women, straight men in abusive relationships.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think there are some women who just hate men, in the same way there are some men who just hate women, and that's not a good thing.
It's another thing you can't talk about. It's okay, well, for those women, there's a cultural problem within that community, and they do have to solve that, because it's not healthy to then hate all men for the rest of your life, you know?
Yeah.
And it's also not, you don't deserve that. You don't deserve the abuse, you know, regardless, like we all deserve respect and dignity if we're giving it.
I don't expect people to say not all men whenever they're talking about stuff, but there is a way of phrasing stuff that makes it clear that you're talking about, you don't mean all men. Something I posted or commented on LinkedIn from, I think it was a LinkedIn news piece about rich white men are to blame for climate issues in the UK. And it's like, no, the people who are responsible are mostly rich white men. That doesn't mean the rich white men as a whole group, or even men as a whole group, are responsible for, like, it's the way around you phrase that. A third of domestic violence is against men by other men, but also from women. Like, there is a lot more male violence out there, but actually also the portion of male violence, not domestic violence, but general male violence, is against other men.
Yeah.
The issue isn't that men are violent towards women, it's that there are a small number of men who are just violent, and men and women are their victims. And there's a particular issue around violence against women and girls. But yeah, it's difficult to kind of get into a nuanced conversation without it coming across as, or people taking it as either diminishing what a problem is or justifying something, and also it doesn't help, like, within this debate, the issue is around, when it comes to women's safety, women's changing rooms, single sex spaces for women, women's sports and the physical risks there, it doesn't necessarily help to give a lot more context and nuance, because you're just trying to get that particular point across, and that makes sense to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be frustrating.
Any thoughts on the election?
So an election, it's weird. I had a local, I had the mayoral elections the last thing I voted in. I tweeted to say, in like 2 decades of voting, it's the first time I voted Conservative. Not because I wanted the Conservative candidate, but I didn't want Sadiq Khan because of various things, primarily the kind of woke virtue signalling element of that. I live in an area that's a safe Labour seat, or relatively a safe Labour seat, and given the indication is there's going to be a swing away from Conservatives generally in terms of people being dissatisfied with the government and stuff. Generally, I don't see my vote as making any difference in this constituency that I currently live in. I think it's hard to tell, because of the electoral system we have, that opinion polls don't really, they're an indication, but they don't mean a lot, because it depends on which constituency you're applying them to. We have so many safe seats that actually you've got to look at where the swing happens in marginal seats. And what that does, I think, I'm a government and politics student of the past, but actually I've kind of lost interest in looking at it in detail. I used to kind of follow in much more detail in previous elections, but now I think, from what I have read, I think there's a likelihood of a hung parliament or some kind of coalition. It's hard to...
And Reform are doing pretty well.
Yep. Yeah. I think someone's talked about how the UK kind of needs a Biden era. Like, we're ahead on some things and behind on others in terms of the gender debate.
Yeah.
The wokeness of the Biden era is what's going to help get Trump re-elected. I think there's an element of, do we need to have a Labour government and for things to get worse on the woke front, for more people to wake up to how ridiculous it is and readjust?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we're way ahead on solving or tackling some of it. Like, we've had the CAS review, we've had various tribunal court cases and stuff. So actually we've been tackling in a way.
Guidance, or
yeah,
hopefully they're going to be banning that.
Yeah, so I think it's difficult. I think there's an upside to a Labour government, is that it will mean there'll be a new leader of the Conservative Party, which, if that's Kemi Badenoch, I would be all in favour of that.
Oh, I like her as well. Yeah.
And I'm also, like, I can't remember if we mentioned it on this, or I was talking to somebody else today maybe about Wes Streeting and what he said recently about where he felt he was wrong to have said trans women are literally women and whatever he's talking about. Yeah, I'm massively oversimplifying what he said probably there, but he had an article in some major newspaper, I think it was in the last few weeks, basically saying, while he supports everyone's right to be protected and whatever, sex means sex and we shouldn't be diminishing female spaces and that kind of stuff. So he was saying the right things. Whether he actually believes it or not, I almost don't care. But knowing Wes, I don't know Wes well. I know of Wes through through NUS circles when I was a sabbatical officer at my union and he was in the NUS. So knowing his circle, he is very politically astute and I'm sure he has his eye on Labour leadership one day. So the fact that he has said that, knowing an election, I don't know if the election had been called when he said it, but knowing an election is going to be happening at some point this year, it indicates to me that he has seen the way the wind is blowing for the country in terms of the wider perception and opinions on the issue. So while I think Labour is going to be more progressive / woke on a number of issues, the fact that someone like Wes Streeting would say that indicates that it's not completely captured if they can see that it's not what the majority of the public would go along with, which is why it's really important for us to, and all the various groups with all the various approaches, to be talking about it so that more people are aware of it and talking about it, and people ask their candidates when they're knocking on their door and those sorts of things.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe they'll surprise us, but I think the Tories were already pretty bad at this stuff, and now we're getting possibly people that are even worse at it. And I'm kind of politically homeless now, although I'm just so much more skeptical of left policy than I used to be. But like, gotta be honest, like the Farage and like the stuff he's saying is, to me, it's sort of coming across as the only person actually speaking about some common sense, or like at least trying to call things out how it is. And then I live in an area as well that's just unequivocally going to be Labour, so it's kind of easier for me then to at least be like, okay, I'm going to vote for who I actually think sounds like they're speaking the truth.
I've not really listened to any of or heard any of what Farage has said or Reform has said. I did see like a list on a thing. It's really easy for a newer, smaller party to promise a load of stuff because they're not going to be the government. They may, if they're big enough, they may be in coalition or something, but they'll have some MPs. But it's really easy to talk about stuff when actually you're not going to form a government. But that doesn't mean you should only vote for one of the two main parties. It kind of makes you think the difference between, so like in the US, I would love for RFK Jr. to be the president there because he talks so much sense, and more just the not being captured from the corruption of politics in America. But I don't think there's going to, because it is such a, if you don't vote for one of the main two candidates, there's a perception you're wasting your vote. He's actually a candidate that would make a difference for, whereas here you can vote for another party and there will be MPs who are not even in the largest three parties or four parties, because actually SNP is a larger party than the Lib Dems, I think. But those parties aren't going to form a government. So yeah, I would probably describe myself as politically homeless as well, and that's having been a Labour Party member in the past, and a Green Party member in the past, and a Lib Dem briefly in the past.
Greens.
And now they're
insane. The Greens.
Well, it's another. When we said earlier about there are lots of different axes that people have opinions on, and I think we are not. America is much more. They have one main axis that is left and right, but actually it's not even left and right in traditional politics. It's Democrat and Republicans. Our left and right, in terms of what it used to mean, it was mainly economics and the workers, all the corporations type split on the left and right. That isn't our political divide anymore. Probably before Brexit, but definitely Brexit is one of the main ones. Whether you voted Leave or Remain didn't fall along party lines.
Yeah,
and there are other issues. Scottish independence, the gender identity stuff, any kind of issue falls along lines that don't align with parties or the traditional left-right. So actually it makes it really hard to predict or think what would happen in terms of...
It's why I feel more comfortable kind of just voting for who I want, because the more I look into all this stuff, I'm like, what? I'm reading, watching more videos, and I'm thinking, where is the far right extremism? Like, I'm not seeing it, because it's what I was told. And I guess immigration, even, you know, there was a time when left and right cared about that equally, and now it's condemned, I guess, on the left.
Well, far right is just another term that's added to the list of how to shut down a conversation with someone you disagree if you're progressive. So
100%.
Far right, bigot, transphobe, racist, all the things that they'll throw at you to shut you up because they seem really bad. Because the progressive extreme left push so far left, anything right or centre right can be considered far right, and yet it's undefined. It's
totally, yeah. Far right to me is like Hitler, you know.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't see that, although I actually see that on the left. I suppose you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the authoritarianism of the extreme left.
Yeah, but also like the growing embrace of Islamic and extremism, I guess, in some pockets of that.
So if you are a human gay male anywhere in the world, you can go to www.humangaymail.com and sign up. We have a few filtering questions, but it's a really simple sign up. You'll then get email, so all the notifications about events get sent out by email. You can put in your location. There's some kind of groups to select, but you can also put in your nearest city. So if I find there's lots of people are in a city that we haven't done an event or whatever, we'll use that to decide where to do stuff. So sign up on the website. You'll get emails about the events and other developments as we grow stuff. I'm also, the Twitter handle is @HumanGayMale. So I'm there spouting opinions. I'm more doing stuff on LinkedIn. If you search Human Gay Male LinkedIn, you'll find my posts. It's just my own profile on there. But feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and share or comment on the stuff that I'm putting on LinkedIn, because I think that's having more of an impact in reaching more people than Twitter stuff is. I am on YouTube as well, but I've not done something on YouTube for ages. But I've got some other interviews I want to line up, so I can interview you, and we can put on my YouTube.
My door's always open, for sure. I would love it. I'd be honoured. Well, James, thank you so much, and everyone go sign up for the mailing list. I am, and look forward to meeting you in person.
Great. Thanks, Jack. It's been great.